This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A very good morning to you. I hope you had a lovely bank holiday weekend. I may have to repeat that occasionally just to drive home into my own pathetic brain that it is now Tuesday. Feels like a Monday, but it isn't a Monday. It's definitely a Tuesday. Oh, that doesn't come as a major shock to anybody. This is a tricky one. I'm not worried about the rules of journalism and contempt of court because I know that you understand them and we are all grown-ups on this programme. So there is a suspect in the horrors that unfolded on the streets of Liverpool yesterday, and an arrest has been made. Charges have not been brought. We will not be discussing anything with regard to what happened, especially. Except insofar as how the police chose to describe the suspect. And it is new. This is something that I don't have enough confidence in my... What's the word I want? I said news antennae in the little talk-up at the end of Nick's show. It should be a better word than that. I don't have enough confidence in my convictions almost. I don't have enough courage in my convictions to be 100% certain that my inklings last night when this story first broke were correct, but they were. I've checked with people who are much older, well, not older necessarily, but much more experienced and much more reliable in these matters than I am. They have chosen to describe the suspect in this case as a white British man, a 53-year-old white British man. So far it could be me. A 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area. And what I had to check with more experienced colleagues was that this is a new development. This is not something that would ordinarily have happened. And I think it's pretty clear why it has happened. Because of fears of far-right provocateurs either taking to social media to spread lies and misinformation about the identity, the ethnicity, the religion, the immigration history of the suspect, or, and this is where I get really worried, or had the suspect ticked some of the boxes beloved of far-right racist provocateurs, then I can't help worrying now that the message from the police would be, we now expect violence, but we don't expect it when we tell you that the suspect is a 53-year-old white British man. And I know there is a world of difference between expect and invite, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm struggling to see where the line between the two is this morning. I'm really struggling not to see this development as a tacit admission that when the suspect in a case like this is brown or Muslim or not from these shores originally by birth, then it would somehow be, what word do I want now? Acceptable? Probably not. Unless you're one of the people minded to get involved in that kind of violence. What message do you take away from this decision to pander to your prejudices? And remember that in the case of the Southport killings, the prejudices were false. The people spreading lies and misinformation for clicks and influence were in possession of precisely zero facts. The usual suspects jumping on the usual bandwagons to whip up hatred of asylum seekers. Now they're trying to defend a woman who pleaded guilty to incitement to racial hatred after calling for a pogrom to start in hotels full of people wholly innocent of any crimes. But that is the world we live in now. That is the country we inhabit. Tell me I'm wrong. 0345 60 60973. Tell me that this is not a surrender of sorts to the forces of hate. Why else? would they make this such a top priority? Why else do they need to get the colour, the ethnicity, the nationality of the suspect into public discourse so early, if not to somehow prevent the kind of scenes that we saw on our streets this summer after the Southport killings? 9 minutes after 10 is the time. I usually at this point start exploring the alternative position. I usually at this point start explaining the counterpoint to what I'm suggesting. But I can't currently see it. And that worries me on two levels, one serious, one not so serious. On the serious level, it worries me because I can't see the counterpoint. And on a less serious level, it worries me because I don't know what you're going to say to me today. I mean, if we all agree, whether we are repulsed by the sort of scenes that we saw during the Farage riots of last summer, or whether we are minded to join in and are excited by them, I don't know that we would disagree that the decision to release the identity of the suspect, that the identifying characteristics of the suspect can be seen as anything other than an admission that when people suspected of undertaking behaviours like this fit certain categories, religiously, ethnically, in terms of immigration status, then there will be blood. What does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, I presume there'll be nobody on social media today encouraging you to set fire to buildings containing 53-year-old white British men like me. I presume that won't happen, and I presume all the people currently queuing up to defend the woman who made precisely that plea when the buildings were full of asylum seekers won't recognise the danger of their own position. What does it mean now? What does it mean that the police are tacitly, and again I say, please tell me that I'm wrong about this, but from where I'm sitting, the police are tacitly acknowledging that if a crime is committed by a certain type of human being, the response from certain sections of the public will be completely different from what it would be if a crime is committed by, for example, a 53-year-old white British man. What does it mean that has happened? That's a good phrase from David, ugly pragmatism. Because I don't know that you can fault the police's decision. I mean, the tragedy here for our country, for people who rather like living here and don't understand the effort that so-called patriots put into trying to impugn and malign our island nation, the tragedy here is that the police are right, aren't they? I'm not on Twitter anymore, but sometimes it will filter through to the platforms that I am still on. And some of the poison that is being spread, some of the obvious lies, some of the claims that it was a false flag. I mean, I don't think the average Joe or Joan appreciates just how deep into public discourse this terminal online far-right talking point has gone. I mean, the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, is part of this particular problem. The broader question of being terminally online and focusing and swallowing far-right talking points. I don't think that it is widely or properly appreciated, even by quite senior members of traditional media, even quite probably by me, just how deep into the bloodstream of public discourse this hatred and bigotry has now gone. You know, you don't need me to tell you which politicians thrive on this hatred and bigotry. You don't need me to tell you which politicians, public figures, pundits, commentators and columnists actively encourage and then benefit from it. But the message that is being sent to the country today, I think, is we don't worry about riots when the suspect is a white British 53-year-old man. And I don't know what that says about our country, and I don't know what that means for our future. But I want you to tell me. 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. Obviously this is sensitive stuff. Thank God so far. We are not talking about fatalities in the context of the incident in Liverpool, but we know that 4 children are among the injured, and we will, as ever on LBC, be bringing you any news and developments as they occur. The injuries of at least 2 people are very serious. We know that. But the focus of this conversation is on something that has shifted in our country, in our nation. And I'm not going to say for good or for ill, because it's the worst kind of thing. It's the worst kind of shift. I think it's awful. And I think it had to happen. So today is one of those days, which we haven't had for a while. And please God, it stays true that we are not discussing fatalities. But today is one of those days where it is as if we work together. Or it is as if we are not on the same bus. I don't think you start conversations like this on the bus, possibly in Yorkshire, but certainly not on my bus route. But it is as if we know each other outside of our morning radio encounters, and we are just going to sit down and chat. And I'm no more qualified than you are. I guess I've awarded myself the role of starting the conversation. If we were sitting around the same water cooler, or we were sitting at the same table in the staff canteen, I would probably have begun by saying, "Is it just me?" You know, when you do that, when you're about to sort of launch a rhetorical hand grenade into the conversation, is it just me? Or does the fact that the police have immediately told us that the suspect is a white British 53-year-old man, is it just me? Or does that mean that if he wasn't, the message to the Farage rioters and their friends would be, fill your boots? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Of course, there are questions. Fred in Guildford poses one. If a 53-year-old white British man is suspected of an atrocity, surely the legitimate concerns crowd will be out protesting at golf clubs and model train shops. I think that's a slightly unfair portrayal of 53-year-old men. Fred, speaking as a 53-year-old white British man, I can assure you I'm not particularly interested in golf clubs or model train shops, but I have started spending more time than is healthy in garden centres. So actually, if you add garden centres to the list, then yes, the legitimate concerns mob should no doubt be calling for garden centres to be set on fire, or sending their rampaging, knuckle-dragging followers onto the local golf course. I'm Fred making light of the situation, but with a sense of seriousness. With a sense of seriousness. Steve says, have you considered that the driver could be a white Muslim? You're going to look a mug if that turns out to be true. Steve, they're making my point for me in ways that I could not have driven home as powerfully if I'd continued this introduction for 3 hours. Because if it does turn out to be a white Muslim, Steve will think that it's okay to riot. It's okay to set fire to hotels full of asylum seekers. It's okay to attack the police. It's okay to throw bricks at the thin blue line. It's a big moment, this. I'm always slightly wary of saying that first. Not first. There are a couple of other people who are tilting at similar windmills, but I'm always slightly wary of it because my instincts are not brilliant when it comes to what the news is, but they're pretty good when it comes to where bigotry is taking us, where ignorance and demagoguery, where the snake oil salesmen are leading us. Haven't been wrong about that for a while, if ever. And I think this is a big win for them. We now live in a country where if the suspect in a horrific event is described as white British, we can be confident that we won't be seeing rampaging mobs taking to the streets of our country and attacking entirely innocent people for the crimes of somebody perceived, or the alleged crimes of somebody perceived to be a little bit more like the suspect than them. It's not quite scale of 1 to 10 stuff, is it? But on a scale of 1 to 10, how troubled are you by this? Because I think I'm a 10. Just in terms of what it says about society, in terms of what it says about where we are, The 53-year-old white British man. Even as I speak, it's popping up on the subtitles on my TV screen. That didn't used to happen. And of course, underpinning all of the questions that I'm asking you, what if it wasn't? What if it wasn't? I mean, why are they telling us this, if not to acknowledge that if it wasn't a 53-year-old white British man, then the reaction would not only be very different, but somehow also sanctioned or encouraged, invited or acknowledged, whatever verb you prefer. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. I think it's good that they give the details when they're fact-based and won't allow crazy people to incite hate. The problem is, of course, that they will give the details next time when perhaps they would incite what you described, Maria, as crazy people to incite hate. Jake in Oxford writes, when I heard the news this morning that instantaneously reported the race of the suspect, I winced like a two-footed tackle in football. I just thought of what the ramifications would be. Albeit a pragmatic decision from the police, I think they may regret it in the long term as it sets a dangerous precedent. And Anne-Marie makes a very interesting point. Another element is that black and brown people have always had targets on our backs. So the subliminal message has always been that we are bad and no good, to the point where I and many others always pray that a perpetrator isn't black or brown because we know what the response will be. And how many white people listening to me now, how many fellow 53-year-old white British men are worried that they're going to be somehow tarred with the same brush as this suspect? Oh my God, it's a 53-year-old white British man. I better not go out today. Do you see what I mean? That's the point that Anne-Marie is making. And she brings it home with a really good analogy, actually. She says, remember the missed penalties at the Euro. This is the latest evolution of where we have all been heading for a very long time. 22 after 10. John's in Liverpool. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, it was just on the word at the start of your programme about a surrender to the far right. I just think what the police, in this instance, I think what the police did was just the right decision. I think in any walk of life, to get the best outcome, you need to make the right decisions. And if that meant identifying the person as
suspect,
as ethnicity, the suspect, to avoid any grave incidents down the line, I think they did the right thing. But then your researchers kind of said to me, well, what if it was a refugee, a Muslim who'd done it? Should they then also identify them? Which is a good point. But then I thought, well, whatever they decide to do to get the best outcome is the best thing to do
in that moment. Actually, I think you're right. I think, oddly, I think it is a surrender to far-right sensibilities or far-right prejudices, precisely because it is saying to society, we will get a different response if and when the suspect is from a different ethnicity or from a different background. But our job is to make sure we don't have more Farage riots tomorrow. Therefore, we better release the fact that the suspect in this case looks more like Nigel Farage than he does, or looks more like me than he does, like the people that are filmed falling out of dinghies in Dover every week. I mean, that is what they've done, but it makes me very, very sad and not a little bit scared because of what it will do next time a suspect is does tick the hate boxes of the usual suspects. What message do they take away from this?
No, I agree, but I just think if these nutcases, I'm going to call them, need to be managed and corralled in a certain way by certain words or certain actions, well, that's the best outcome. Let's just avoid tragedy, however we can do it.
Yeah, I that's it, isn't it? I mean, that is the whole thing about holding two ideas in your head at the same time. The police have done the right thing, but only because we live in a world where hate is winning. And they have to acknowledge, they have to legislate for the world in which hate is winning, not for the world in which we used to live and the world in which most of us, I think, still would prefer to live. John, thank you. I just, while I have you here, from Liverpool itself, the mood in the city, I presume, is absolutely dazed at the moment.
Well, we were about 500 metres. We were on the Strand yesterday, so from where it happened in Water Street, and we only heard on the radio coming out of Liverpool. We live just outside Liverpool, but all of the reaction is. Well, one of the reactions, unfortunately, is when it always seems to be. It's always when a Liverpool thing, when a big event that happened at Liverpool Football Club, has over the years ended in an absolute horrific tragedy. And there's kind of that, you think, oh my goodness, not again. So it's very somber and incredulous, really. And you see those horrific images.
And that would be perhaps an element for our conversation on a different day. Not you, but the curious contradiction of the police urging individual members of the public not to share any footage they may have recorded or seen on social media, while traditional media, broadcasters most obviously, but also newspapers as well, some newspapers seem determined to share the grisliest images they can find. Thank you, John. James is in Glasgow. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'd like to just thoughts and prayers with all those involved of yesterday's atrocity. I think in general the police had no option but to really set information as early as they could, basically with regard to what happened in Southport and the Farage riots and everything else that the right-wing movement in this country, which is growing exponentially. Their hatred is undeniable. Even last night when I went online, because I knew fine well it would be full of comments from people without actually knowing any information, and they were just so willing to discredit what the police were saying, that it was a cover-up, it was a false flag, and there was no way it was a white person, asking people if they'd seen actual pictures of the driver to confirm whether or not they were white or not.
God.
And it was just unbelievable to read. The comments were just disgusting, just absolutely disgusting. I just find the society we live in today, that's where we are, where the first attack is going to be, there must be an immigrant, or there must be an asylum seeker.
But they're desperate for it to be true as well. That is the crucial element of this tragedy, as in the tragedy of where the country has ended up, not the tragedy that unfolded in Liverpool yesterday. They're two distinct things, but the tragedy that we're discussing is that is the country that we have apparently become now.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've no doubt that people like Farage were probably sitting, hopefully, that it was going to come out it was someone from a minority within the UK, because it just leads to their message they want to put out there, it leads to their followers.
I'm sure he'd dispute that, but he jumped all over the alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate's lies last time round. So I mean, there are some grounds for your suspicions.
He also reported when the Southport incident happened that he retweeted posts that were unfactual about that situation as well. So he has done it before.
But the police, I think he would again claim that he was simply asking questions. But we can do the same, of course. This, as everyone I think is going to agree, and this is why I'm so discombobulated this morning. The police have done the right thing in the context of this event. But as Brendan has just texted me, what happens when an asylum seeker does undertake comparable actions to this? Well, that's the second message here, isn't it? So the first message is, it's all right. You police attacking, hotel burning freaks. You don't need to go and load up your petrol bombs and start sharpening your cudgels, whether rhetorical or actual, because this suspect is white. But what message do they receive next time? They're not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's how...
Oh, man, I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong, James. I want someone to explain to me why we've all got this slightly wrong, and you don't need to worry about what message it sends to the usual suspects. About.
And unfortunately, you're not wrong, and it's true of the society of where we are in society right now. Because the willingness to believe what's actually true that doesn't fit the narrative... or to make up something that fits their narrative is what they want, I think that's just where we are.
It seems sadly to be where we are, and that I think is a more profound moment than even we're fully acknowledging at the moment. It changes something fundamental to this country, to the United Kingdom, and a sort of form of equality before the law. Not quite, because the law would act the same regardless of identity, despite all the ludicrous claims about two-tier justice. But it's equality before the court, equality before the court of public opinion, equality before the people. It's as if the police have, I think, inevitably and almost certainly correctly, it's as if the police have acknowledged we don't have that. And we're not even going to pretend that we do anymore. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This from Ian. The right-wing ghouls, and he chooses to name some, but I won't, are already celebrating today, James, the actions of the police to confirm that a white British man is the suspect in the Liverpool case is a huge win for them, because when there is another incident, they will expect the nationality or race to be released immediately. If not, the Farage narrative of information being hidden will be given oxygen. Oh, and Twitter is still full of false flag stories and police cover-ups. There's a former footballer who has posted something pretty hideous as well, which fits very neatly into the context of the conversation that we're having. And it points also to the sort of denigration of basic morality, because you have a footballer who's been found guilty recently of both wife-beating and a High Court libel case has also found that online posts he made about a black footballer were defamatory, had a defamatory meaning. But on Twitter, on Elon Musk's Twitter, he can still cast himself as some sort of folk hero. 10:35 is the time. Lloyd is in Lewisham. Lloyd, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that the police is responding to what the country is saying, and the country is saying this: we don't care what's been done, we only care who's done it.
Oh, Lord.
So that's
you're using the "we" in an academic sense here, I think, rather than describing your own thoughts and feelings.
No, not my thoughts.
Yeah.
No way. Respond to what society is saying.
Yeah.
In a broad sense, obviously, because they know that if they made the same announcement, but it was a person of a different race, ethnicity, whatever, the riots will happen anyway. The trouble would happen anyway. All they're doing now, their new tactic is to announce them all so they don't have to police every situation, because it will only happen on the instances where there is a different, a non-white person doing it. That's all it is.
I wish I could. You know me, mate. I can start an argument in an empty room, but I've got nothing to push back on with this. And I can't quite believe how quickly it's all happened, how quickly we've become a country where if a crime is committed by someone who... Can I ask what your ethnic background is, Lloyd? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. I'm Afro-Caribbean.
Okay, so if a crime is committed by someone who looks like me, everyone can relax. If a crime is committed by someone who looks like you, or someone who looks like they have parents who came here from somewhere else or came here from, then action stations.
That's always been the case.
Not like this. Not as stark as this, Lloyd.
Well, when you think about it, okay, I don't want to mention the cases, but where there's been child abductions and rings involving children from years and years ago, nothing said. It's reported, but there's nobody wanting to go out and riot and march down the streets.
No, you're right.
You're
right. Yeah, I mean, but this is that great word Maria used was evolution. This is like a stage of evolution in the normalisation of race-based hatred. It is now normalised because the police will actually say, "Don't worry, it's a white suspect. There's no need to riot." And no one's going to be walking around. No 53-year-old white British man like me is going to be walking around worried about what other people are thinking.
Well, yes, and I don't think the police are necessarily saying it in that way, although it amounts to the same thing. What they're really saying is, okay, fellow officers, we're okay this weekend or tomorrow.
Yeah.
And when it's a person of a different race, they say, okay, let's get our riot shields out because it's going to kick off.
Yeah, that's the message.
And it's simply down to logistics and saving a bit of money because society is what it is now, which is don't worry about the crime, worry about who's committing it. Don't get angry if the person looks like you because, I don't know, it doesn't mean that we're allowed to. Or
I think it does, mate.
Is what it is.
I think it does. I really do. I think it is saying. I mean, from the minute that Farage started amplifying the lies of people like the alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, I thought this is going to be a moment. This is going to be a moment, because then one of the terror watchdogs came out and said maybe the police should share more information. I thought maybe the country should clamp down much harder on the people who both provoke and undertake the acts of violence and incitement than we saw last summer. And that, I think, is why you bring funding into it. It's a heck of a lot cheaper to just say, all right, everyone stand down, it's a white fella, than it is to say, anybody who is seeking to incite hatred or seeking to set fire to hotels or attacking police or launching pogroms in the 21st century, that we are going to come down on them like a ton of bricks, because what we're not going to do is modify or alter the way that we investigate serious crimes. But here we are.
Unfortunately, you can't.
No, and they're the people telling us, as Lauren points out, these are the people who were constantly telling us to abandon identity politics. You couldn't make it up. Also, the big sort of free speech warriors. You couldn't make it up, could you? It's a grim day, Lloyd, isn't it? It's definitely a big moment. Not the most important thing that's going on at this precise moment. That is the welfare of the injured, including the child and the adult who are seriously hurt. But in the context of what it's done to our country, this feels permanent.
We are now a country of the hard of thinking. That is what it is.
The invitation to hate first and ask questions later is being taken up by more people than ever before. I'd probably put it that way.
A lot of us are led by emotions and opinion born of those emotions.
Yes, of course.
Not opinion and emotions born of fact. It's as simple as that. And if fact is not your basis, then your opinions and emotions could bring you in. You read something on X, which I don't go on anymore. I've been accessible for ages now. It's no one can sit down and think, okay, I've just read this story. Let me check a lot of other sources to see if this story is true. Yeah. No one does it anymore.
No, people can go on the telly and start ranting, and people with blue ticks and big followings can start spreading all sorts of lies. And I keep saying it's the harder thinking. We do not think anymore, but maybe because of Google and all the other stuff that happens, we've got short attention span, or we read something that we like the sound of and we just stick with that. I think it's endorphins. I think something kicks in hormonally, or what's the other word I want? When you see stuff that triggers your fight or flight syndrome, even in a position of safety. These accounts that share nothing but footage of crimes being committed by people of colour. They like wallpaper social media, and people love it.
I get sent stuff, right, that is from the other side, let's say, for want of a better word, making a falsehood about someone with my background on the positive side. Right. And saying that, and I look at it and say, well, I don't share those things online anyway, but I look at it and I research and say, well, actually, that's crap.
Yeah. Well, same. I do it live in the studio sometimes. People will come on and tell me something about people getting free cars or free houses. And there was one time recently where I found the root of the lie. I found the source of the online lie and the fact check. But I don't even know if that caller went away chastised or rethinking his position. He might have just gone hardened or more stubborn at the end of the exchange. I don't know what we do with that. To be honest, I don't know what we do about it as well. I think people only realise and think about things when it happens to them. People are, when it could be stop and search. It's a great thing, stop and search, until you're the ones being stopped and searched. Everyone loves the police until they're the ones being policed.
Exactly. It's hard of thinking.
Okay. No, I mean, it is. I just sometimes worry, perhaps belatedly, that you're unlikely to win people over or tempt them out of that place of ignorant false security by using language like that, but it's certainly a lot milder than some of the language I've used over the years, so it would be a tad pot kettle of me to criticise you. One thing I do come back to quite a lot is that one of the little girls killed in South Park, Alice, was the child of immigrants. I do come back to that quite a lot because these little moments of clarity, logic and fact give such a proverbial kicking to all of the opposite of those things. You know, the lack of logic, the absence of facts, the prioritising of emotion over intellect, as Lloyd describes, the hard of thinking. You hate immigrants so much that you are... What are you doing with regard to the parents of that little girl in Southport? Telling them to go back where they came from? I don't quite see that there is no logic to it. And that is the country that the police yesterday night chose to speak to. The hard of thinking, the loss, the lack of logic. And of course, we cannot overestimate or indeed exaggerate the role that has been played by some deeply dangerous, divisive and disgusting people. In many cases, the same people responsible for hobbling this country, for bringing it to its knees in so many ways with regard to the economy, to international trade, to status, to the heft that we now have as a nation. They've hobbled the country and they never stop moaning about the state of play or attacking the people trying to fix it. And they will be absolutely cock-a-hoop this morning, because next time, as Oliver puts it, talking about Lloyd, this caller is absolutely right. He puts it beautifully. It all puts the police in a horrible position next time someone from a different background does something wrong. They either release the information immediately and we get more riots and innocent people being targeted, or they withhold it and get accused of covering up. It's horrible, but that's the world we live in now. It's the land that Nigel built.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47. The one thing you can't do is give up. Either give up the fight for decency or give up the attempts to understand what is going on, even as the people that you're analysing defy most laws of logic. I think it's pretty simple in this case, and forgive me if this is obvious to you, but people are desperate to believe that ethnicity, nationality, immigration status, asylum status are causes of crime. It's why Lloyd mentioned stop and search. Elderly white men with radio shows like nothing more than to wang on about what a brilliant tactic stop and search is, but seriously chuck them over the bonnet of a Black Maria and start frisking them for no reason or without any grounds for suspicion, and they'll be squealing like a stuck pig. But they know it's never going to happen to them because they're elderly white men with a radio show or a newspaper column or a political party. So and we talked, didn't we, to what's the name of the lad from Hope Not Hate that wrote The Year of the Rat? We talked to him, one of his big discoveries when he was undercover in infiltrating these hideous far-right organisations who've now got tentacles in much, much, much more respectable corners of the country, not least on social media. But the fake science underpins a lot of the real nastiness. The idea that your ethnicity somehow defines your IQ is the other side of the coin that contends Harry Schuckman. I really recommend that book, The Year of the Rat. It's the other side of the coin that suggests that your ethnicity, your nationality, your asylum status somehow defines or determines your proclivity to criminality. Something you can say is that almost all of the terrible acts that we discuss on this programme are committed by men. But when do men ever have to answer for themselves? It's crazy, right? But you can pick some defining characteristics, usually ethnic, sometimes religious, and it's an open season now on claiming that the actions of an individual somehow describe and define the attitudes and the character of everybody like them. This is career for some people now. This is a career. It is literally a career. And on Elon Musk's Twitter, you can make enough money weaponizing this sort of ignorant hatred to give up your day job. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it's there. You know, people are sending me examples of it this morning, that the evidence is there. People are doing it for clicks and status and influence. And here we are. 10:50 is the time. What does it mean for the future? Short answer is that if a crime it is committed by somebody who is here seeking asylum or somebody who has recently arrived, then I think that people have been told reacting like they reacted last summer is to be expected. I don't think I would say to be encouraged, but the line between the two is a line I cannot draw. I can't tell you where expected finishes and encouraged begins. And if they feel encouraged, then have they been encouraged? A philosophical conundrum for you at 9 minutes to 11 on a Tuesday morning. If I say something and you take from my words the idea that I am encouraging you, even though I'd swear blind that I wasn't, am I guilty of incitement? And I just mean relatively mild language. I don't mean saying go and set fire to the hotels, burn the lot of them, because you can say that in this country now and get defended, up to and including the comment pages of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. So it will be expected. Violence will be expected. And what's it built on? It's built on a determination to believe a lie. And what's the lie? The lie is that the colour of your skin or the accident of birth on your passport somehow defines your proclivity for criminality. And do you know who celebrates the most when that kind of attitude takes hold of a society, takes hold of a country? I'll tell you who. White criminals, British paedophiles, British white paedophiles and killers and criminals. They love it when a society gets high on its own supply, gets caught up in the idea that an ethnicity is a trigger for certain types of behaviour, because the people committing that kind of behaviour who don't have that ethnicity, they're home and dry. And the louder they shout about how you need to watch them or you need to watch that type of person, the more suspicious I am of what they get up to in private. Because I don't understand why else you would do it. Don't look over here, look over there. At completely innocent people. Who are you trying to distract the attention from, if not potentially guilty people? But here we are. That's it. That's where we live. 10:52 is the time. Nad is in Camden. Nad, what would you like to say?
James, you described a horrible reality, but I wanted to share, how I felt when I read this, and immediately thinking, why are the headlines not talking about the victims? And
partly because nobody's died. I just to be a bit boring for a moment, and partly because it's only hours since it happened, and not a great deal will be known, and anything that is known would have been known too late to make this morning's newspapers, which will set the agenda. Sure. So carry on with your point, but there are some logical answers to your question, or less depressing.
Yeah, because that was then my observation around the headlines, is that what are the headlines talking about? And they're not talking about terrorism. They are talking about carnage, and they are, I think that's the big word of the day. But then my feeling, and I can't help thinking that I'm, from an ethnic Muslim background, but me and many hundreds and millions of others were probably relieved to know that this wasn't, somebody who was being labelled as Muslim and possibly from an ethnic background. Or
because no one's going to throw a brick through your window later today.
Right, completely. But then, the other observations are, well, then, now that we do know the demographic of this individual, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? Apart from just a nod for those racist sects of society that say, okay, yeah, it was one of us, so we can just carry on.
And this speaks to your original point, is that no one, and Lloyd and Lewisham made this point as well, no one's even pretending to care about the victims.
Then the last observation for me is, where are all the commentators?
Yeah.
I won't name them, but you speak about them every day, if anything. Where are they? Where are they commentating on which platforms? Where is the support for those victims? And your children, right? You picked that up yourself. I didn't pick that up, but there's children in that. Where are those commentators today? Of course, one of those commentators will be up outside Parliament delivering a whole different speech today. But I'll be watching closely to see if he mentions it.
What broader point about society can you make when the suspect is a 53-year-old white British man? Answer, none. What broader point about society can you make when the suspect is a 25-year-old asylum seeker? Answer, none. But that won't stop them trying.
It's horrible, and I often think about the time when the riots were happening and we were caught up in an office environment and told to evacuate our office. And I looked around, and after all the sort of panic and nervousness of people, employees leaving the office, a handful stayed. A handful stayed because they were okay. It was not us they were after. Never forget that scene. It's okay. It's not,
Yeah. And I don't just carry on. Yeah, and that is it. I mean, there is not a single voice so far suggesting that we've got this wrong, suggesting that it isn't both the right decision for the police in the context of the country that they are policing, and a tragedy for decency, a tragedy for humanitarianism, if you like, a tragedy for anybody who believes that the only thing that matters, or rather that my compassion for the victim of a crime is not going to change according to the ethnicity of who committed it. It is, and goodness me, some people try to bring the atrocities in Gaza into everything. So I'm afraid I'm going to be a little bit guilty of that briefly. It's the same as we talk about. Some people just will not allow you to feel as horrified by the murder of an innocent child of Palestinian extraction as you do about the murder of an innocent child of Israeli extraction. Some people won't let you do that. They insist that one life is worth more than another. And here we see something similar playing out on the domestic stage. A crime is different when it is committed by somebody different. I wonder how many people who've lost a loved one to murder find themselves waking up in the morning and wishing that the murder had been committed by someone of a different ethnicity. I would suggest none whatsoever. But here we are. Frank's in Carlisle. Frank, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call again. I'm a white 51-year-old guy, so we're
stone him.
Exactly. But I mean, I wanted to say I'm happy about this, but happy is a stupid word to use on a day like this.
Sure.
But I mean,
a little bit relieved that there won't be any riots and that people won't be whipping up the hatred of the mob because they haven't got the ammunition that they need to do so.
Well, that, yes, but, where people often talk about British values and you often say, what British values are you talking about? Well, I think one of the big ones is fairness.
Yeah, me too.
And I think if we are going to report crime saying a brown person did this, and that and the other, before anything's gone further than they've just been arrested, before it's gone to court and the facts are known, then we need to do it for everybody. We need to say every time, because all we hear at the moment is there was a crime, here was a crime, there was a crime, this crime was committed by a brown person, there was another crime, there was another crime. If we heard that the 10 other crimes were all committed by white people, it dilutes the message that people who are not from here shouldn't be here because they're causing all the trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that helps. And I think this messaging, it's not for the people who are in the hole. It's not for people who've already boiled their brains. It's for the people who are on the edge.
Yeah.
And it's half term. Now, it's everybody in the country is on half term this week because it's bank holiday weekend. And there were a lot of kids going out in July last year, just going out because they had some time and they wanted to see what was going on.
And because they'd been primed by politicians and pundits and online provocateurs. I mean, this is what breaks my heart, and I don't use that phrase loosely. What breaks my heart is that we've surrendered the battle against them, those politicians, those pundits, those commentators, the ones who lied, the ones who spread misinformation, the ones who were, quotes, just asking questions. We've surrendered. We have become a racist society. If the perpetrator or the suspect is white, it's a lone Ian Dunt writes this morning, it's just some lone madman whose actions have no political implication. And he's speaking generally. If they're an immigrant, in particular a dark-skinned Muslim immigrant, then they represent an entire group and are part of a political attack. That is where we live now. That is Brexit Britain. That's the land that Nigel built.
Now, I'll take that. Obviously, there are people like Farage who are on that bandwagon, but I don't put them as the cause of it. I put social media as the cause of it. When it is profitable for you to spread lies and get clicks, then you'll do whatever you need to do in order to get those clicks and get that money. People will look at a plane flying overhead and say it's chemtrails, and those people are already too far gone. But people have jumped on this social media thing, right away up to politics. You look in America where they're doing things for clicks rather than votes. And it's like that here. I don't know.
And that is partly why Trump and Vance profess to be so concerned about the online safety bill, because it is within the gift of governments to clamp down on at least some of the madness that you describe. But We live in a country where people are in jail for social media posts that the social media platform hasn't taken down. Hideous incitements to racial hatred, hideous incitements to the commission of crimes, serious crimes that some people still can't quite see clearly because they happened on social media, but they would see clearly if it was graffitied on the wall outside their house or if it was bellowed into their face down a loudspeaker. But the platforms are doing nothing. They are doing nothing. And that, of course, is why Trump and Vance are keen to pretend that we've got a problem with free speech so that they can continue. Their sponsors, their oligarch sponsors like Musk and Zuckerberg and the rest of them can continue to do nothing to stem the flow of hatred, incitement and lies that Frank describes. Oh boy, not one. Not even on the text, not even in Idiot's Corner. Janet's accusing me of stirring up racial hatred, but if I were to read you some of Janet's messages to this radio station in recent weeks, then we'd have a very strong case of pot kettle. But not one voice saying that this is wrong, that this doesn't set a hideous precedent for the future, and perhaps a little more surprisingly, not one voice saying that the police had a choice in this matter. That's who we are now. That's where we live.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As promised, any developments with regard to the events in Liverpool last night, we will bring you without delay. But as things stand, we move on now to less horrific contemplations. I think the 2-child benefit cap is toast. I heard a caller earlier. I catch some of Nick's show sometimes if I walk past the speaker, and he had a great caller on earlier today who was just really hitting home the cost of Brexit and how an awful lot of the things that we exercise ourselves with politically are drops in the ocean compared to what Johnson and Rees-Mogg and Farage and his mates did to this country. And child benefit cap falls into precisely that category, as the caller explained. And yet I want to talk about it in a slightly different way today, almost from a sort of ethical or moral point. One of my favourite writers, Stephen Bush, in the Financial Times, has written a brilliant paragraph which ends with a sentence that should be anathema to the radio phone-in host. He says, reasonable people may disagree. I said, what? How dare you suggest that reasonable people may disagree with my carefully cultivated contention? He writes, there are political and philosophical questions to ask about whether the state should provide support to children at all. I take the view that given we all benefit from more young people of working age knocking about, even those of us who do not, will not or cannot have children, then providing for children should be a shared endeavour that we all have an incentive in working together towards, right? I think so, although, as Stephen writes, reasonable people may disagree. Do you? I haven't given much thought to the 2-child benefit cap for a while. It's the law or the ruling which prevents most families for claiming means-tested benefits for any third or additional children born after April 2017. We talk a lot about, well, actually we don't really anymore, but we used to talk a lot about white privilege, largely because we had to explain what it meant to people who were, again, being quite dangerously misled by others. But I do recognise also financial privilege. There was an article in the Telegraph this weekend. Did you see it? By a couple who claim we earn £365,000 a year, but we're being hit really hard by Keir Starmer. We're not going to be able to take 5 holidays anymore. And something very strange happened. It got taken down. But I mean, this is just me being a journalistic anorak. But the article got taken down after it was pointed out the photographs of the family had come from a photograph agency. They were like stock photos of people. So photo agencies have huge catalogues of pictures and you can do a search. So I need a picture of someone who looks Irish or I need a picture of someone who looks like they come from Kidderminster. That wouldn't work, but you take my point. And that's what the photos were on this story. And then other people started digging into the names involved. And let's just say it was very, very hard to find anybody. It was very hard to find anybody who fitted the descriptions contained in the story. And just as a social media brouhaha was brewing, the story disappeared. Absolutely disappeared. But what I mean by financial privilege is that it's true. You know, if you are on £365,000 a year, you will notice when you have less money to spend, even if it's a sum of money that most of the country would consider to be incredibly high. If it is reduced, it's Mr. McCorber, right? How many times do we run through without properly remembering what it was that Mr. McCorber said? If income £100, expenditure £100, result happiness. Income £100, expenditure £100 and 1 shilling, result misery. That is the essence of McCorberism. It doesn't quite hold true across the whole picture, but that doesn't matter whether it's £100, £1,000 or £1 million. You are going to notice in most cases. If you live off your income, you're going to notice when your income either goes down or is taxed more. So I have some financial privilege when it comes to this, in that the decision to abolish child benefit for people like me was not one that hit me particularly hard. I didn't really notice it. I do know that if you have 2 children, the allowance for the eldest child is £26 and 5 pence a week, and for the second child it is £17 and 25 pence per week. I forget precisely where the threshold is. It was around £51,000 when it was first introduced. But the point is that you don't get anything for the third child or the fourth child or the fifth child. And it's means tested as well, which means that children can be punished for mistakes that their parents make, or children can be punished if a parent loses their job or have their working hours reduced years after the birth of the third child. Because what you're going to do if you've got 3 children is split the 2 payments into 3. So if you lose your job, or if you have your hours reduced, or if you do something silly, then the children pay the price. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. 2017 is the cut-off point. So it's only really been in place for 8 years. And the more I thought about it this morning, the more hideous it struck me as. I want to do 2 things today. I want to try to work out where it came from. It's only 8 years ago. I know austerity was just in its sort of dying days, wasn't it? We were sort of coming towards the end of austerity. Nick Clegg was long forgotten. It would have been announced long before that. But the idea that we will give money to parents for their children, and there's no way of ensuring that that's what they spend it on. Have I told you what my mum used to do with the family allowance, it was called? Because it was we were allowed to spend it on clothes when we became teenagers. Mum would take me to Topman in Kidderminster, and I'd be able to spend. I'd get it one month, and my sister would get it the next month, and we were allowed to buy clothes. And you might get a pair of Levi's. I think I had 501s at one point, which was a wonderful thing. So there's no way you can ensure that parents are going to spend it on their children, but it means that in a house where there are children, there will be a little bit more money for those that need it most. I don't quite remember where it sprang from. I've got a horrible feeling it sprang from precisely the sort of tabloid bigotries that seem to be running the nation at the moment, or at least seem to be informing public opinion on an unprecedented scale. Was it anything to do with immigration? Was it an idea that immigrant families have more children than non-immigrant families, so we better take the money away from them? Was that part of the thinking? Should we try and unpick what the logic was? I mean, either through the powers of speculation or indeed through the powers of memory. I don't mind which, actually, because if you think about it, if you think about this country as a civilization, which I grant you is increasingly hard to do after conversations like the one we had in the last hour, then what a profoundly uncivilized policy this was that David Cameron brought in. If, as Stephen Bush puts perfectly, but remember, as he writes at the end of this paragraph, reasonable people may disagree, so 0345 60973 is the number you need if you want to be a reasonable person who disagrees. Providing for children should be a shared endeavour that we all have an incentive in working together towards. We have a massive problem on the horizon in this country, demographically speaking, especially if immigration continues to plummet at the rate that it's been falling over the last 12 months, is that we're going to have more and more elderly people in need of the state pension and quite possibly care, social care or health care, and we're going to have fewer people in the workforce. So the population might even continue to grow, but there'll be fewer people in the workforce and more people over the line, more people of retirement age. And, of course, currently they're likely to be solvent because they're much more likely to be property owners. But as we discussed on Friday, the day is not far off when loads of people who don't have financial security that is attached to property ownership are going to be reaching the end of their working life. And they're going to need rent. They're going to need income. They're going to need looking after. And we have a political narrative in this country that almost nobody is challenging, that we've got to stop people from coming here. So, I mean, what other answer could there possibly be to this imminent problem than encouraging the people who are already here to have more children? I know it all sounds a little bit Mussolini, but, I mean, that is the price you pay when you turn an entire population against immigration. You have to tell people who don't want children they have to have them. I don't care whether you want children or not. You've got to have children. It will be next, I promise you, on the sort of fascist checklist. But as Stephen Bush writes in the Financial Times today, providing for children should be a shared endeavour that we all have an incentive in working together towards. So the key question here is how can anybody object to the idea of having a relatively small payment to every parent for every child? 0345 6060 973. I'd also like to know if the cap, who's going to ring me and say that we would have had more children but we didn't because of the child benefit cap? I mean, what was it designed to do? What was it designed to do? I don't know if this is going to work, but I can only ask you the questions I'm most interested in hearing your answers to. Otherwise, things go really weird. But the two things I'm most interested in are these. What was the thinking behind it? Why was it brought in? 0345 6060 973. And what was it designed to do? What behaviours was it supposed to change? And then, of course, you come to point 3, which is, did it work? But that's too tricky. You're going to give me a ring and say we would have had 4 children, but because of David Cameron, we only had 2? I just can't quite believe that caller exists. But if you do, you know what to do. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. But I think it's a mark of cruelty. I can't remember what I thought at the time, but I presume I thought it was vile. It's means tested, so the argument that people like me don't need it, therefore you should get rid of the whole thing, doesn't count. I wonder how hard it would be to transfer the measures they use to do the means testing from child benefit to winter fuel allowance. That's a conversation for another day. But the idea that society shouldn't provide for children when we all need more people, young people of working age, is it's close to irresistible, isn't it? So, 17 minutes after 11, question number 1, why was it introduced? 0345 6060 973. Question number 2, what was it designed to do? 0345 6060 973. And question number 3, how has it affected you? Like, genuinely? Because I know that Hungary and France have spent quite a lot of money encouraging people to have more children, and that their birth rates haven't really gone up. Ours have gone down. Our birth rate is a source of concern, but whether or not 2017 is recent enough or long ago enough to have actually had that effect, I rather doubt. But everything that a society should value and cherish seems to me to be caught up in the notion of providing parents with the means to look after their children better. I think so. 18 after 11 is the time. There are political and philosophical questions to ask about whether the state should provide support to children at all. So let's ask them. Should the state provide support to children? And I might put you to the front of the queue if you've got an intelligent answer to that question that involves the word no. No, the state shouldn't. If you can't afford... Oh, that's where it comes from. 18 minutes to get to the bleeding obvious. If you can't afford children, you shouldn't have them. Remember? Is that it? Is that what it was designed to pander to? What was it supposed to achieve then? A fall in the birth rate? Did it work? Answer whatever question you want. All of them or none of them. Or tell me that actually, and I like this, the state should not be providing support to children at all. 18 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Nigel Farage currently giving a speech I can see on my screen in which he will call for the abolition of the 2-child cap. And yet, of course, if ever a man embodied the idea that if you can't afford children, then you shouldn't have them in the first place, it was him. But never underestimate the contortions that a political opportunist will undertake in pursuit of attention and votes. 19 after 11 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why was a cap on child benefit introduced, the 2-child benefit cap? What was the political reasoning behind it, and what has it achieved? Because it feels like a policy from the Victorian era, doesn't it? It feels like the policy from a different age. Our birth rate, our UK replacement rate is currently 2.1 births. If you want to replace the number of adults in the population, then you will need 2.1 births, but you can't have 0.1 of a person for obvious reasons. So you actually need to be encouraging families to have 3 children. 21 minutes after 11. Why was it introduced in the first place? And I told you I suffered from financial privilege. So we need to clarify exactly on what the cap is. It's the universal credit claims that you get as a consequence of having children. Should we get someone on to explain it? Can Ros come on and explain it? Because I did confess in advance that I would need a little bit of help in clarifying the numbers because of my own financial privilege. So Ros in Leeds, you have the task of setting the record straight.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Sorry. It was just I was listening and you've got it slightly wrong. In
Not
fact,
for the first time, Ros.
Not for the first time, my darling. But it's slightly more serious than what you're putting forward. So it's not child benefit that has been capped. You can get child benefit for all your children. Okay?
Yes.
The £26.
And £17.25 for the additional children.
Additional, yeah. Exactly. It's the child element of, let's say, universal credit that has been capped.
Ah.
And that, for the first child, is £339 per calendar month. And for the subsequent child, it's £292.81 per calendar month. So it's a massive amount of money to someone on benefits.
Yes.
That was all I wanted to say. I just wanted to say it's much more serious than £26 a week.
So, I mean, £292 a month for your second child and none for your third?
None for your third or subsequent children. There are exceptions like multiple births, things like that. But basically, yeah.
And do we know, can you remember why it was brought in? Can you remember what the political reasoning at the time was?
It was that whole thing of that families, immigrants, that whole hate thing, tended to have larger families. And that if you were a working family, not on benefit, you had to make that choice whether you could afford to have a third, fourth child. Whereas people on benefits could have as many children as they wanted because they get paid for them.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you can see why that was effective, can't you? You can see
Absolutely.
why that was sort of politically weaponised. And why do you know the detail on this? Has it affected you personally, or do you work in the...
No, I just work in that field. I'm a welfare benefit advisor.
And so how effective do you think it has been, for good or for ill? How much difference do you think it has made to society?
It's not made... I don't think it's made any difference whatsoever, apart from increasing child poverty. It hasn't stopped people from having children, well, maybe it has, but we then have to do a lot of applications to charities, to local welfare, to try and get more money for shortfalls and things. So, that budget has had to increase to cover the the reduction in money for your children. And it's just awful.
And the
banks, everything. Sorry, James.
The benefit that the manifesto pledged to lift it when fiscal conditions allow, which was in the manifesto in 2024. Mm-hmm. What would the downside be to that? While I've got you,
I don't think there is a downside. I think we've got to look. We've got to be humane here. We've got to care for our children. We can't have them living in poverty and relying on food banks. And we have to make applications to charities for uniforms. I mean, everything. It's just appalling.
Was it around the time of the poverty porn on Channel 5 and stuff like that, when they were showing all those programs of people who were sort of turned into cartoon characters.
I can't remember, to be honest. I think it was introduced around about 2015 to take effect in 2017.
Yes, it was. I think that's when things like Benefit Street were on the telly, and we turned people into almost celebrities, didn't we, for living for this perception that people were living the life of Riley. So it is considerably more serious than even I in my middle-class ivory tower realised. And it was limitless previously. So if I had 10 children, I'd be getting £292 for each one of them. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? That's how tabloid journalism works. I could whip a mob up into a frenzy over the tiny, tiny number of people in receipt of that sort of money for having such a huge family while not working. But you end up punishing all the people who were not at the extremities of the issue and who were in dire need of it. Thank you, Ros, and thank you for so polite. You see, you can correct somebody without making them feel stupid. Ros just gave us a masterclass in that process. I'm glad that I put in my early defence. That's what it was then, was it? Was it literally just... I remember someone called Lizzie Bardsley. Has anyone else got that name? Jump it. I hope I haven't just misrepresented somebody completely. It might have been. But there was a sense of people taking the mickey, and therefore we'd have to close it down. A 2-child benefit cap to be scrapped. So Labour are about to do it. Farage is calling for it. The Tories brought it in, so they're on a sticky wicket, but would no doubt find ways to defend it. How did it happen in the first place? And how has it been enacted? What has it done? 0345 60 60973. Peter is in Lewis. Peter, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James. Very nice to talk to you.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Well, I'm old enough to remember the glory days when parents actually were responsible for raising their own children without any real benefits apart from the child benefit. And we chose very carefully in those days whether we could even afford one child. And so we took our time. We had one child, and then eventually when we were able to afford another, we had another. And that has worked extremely well. But many years ago, I think it was in the 1960s, the government decided, it was a Labour government, decided that we weren't responsible anymore for bringing up our children, and that they would take the money in taxation and they would pass it through their administration and then pass it back from the father to the mother through these various benefit schemes.
Well, there was only one in the 60s, and that was child benefit, or the family allowance, as it was called, which was...
That's right.
Which you were in favour of when you started talking.
No, I wasn't actually in favour of it. I thought it was ludicrous that it had to come out of one pocket in my trousers and then pass directly to my wife.
Well, it was in case less pleasant men than you may not have been providing their wives with the money that they needed to feed their children.
Well, you earlier mentioned the whole...
But that was the rationale behind it, wasn't it?
Yes, that was the rationale. But as you earlier, informed us, the fact that the money goes to the family as it does now does not mean it's spent on children.
No, but we have to presume it usually is.
Well, we would hope so. But the 2-child benefit was introduced, and I thought it was a sensible thing, because having children is all about choices.
Well, except when it isn't. Except, did you ever lose your job when you were working?
Yes,
and did you use the support of the state? Did you avail yourself of the support of the state when you did?
I was probably fortunate enough to have enough savings to manage.
And the welfare state is for people who aren't. So if you were surviving solely on your salary and you suddenly lost your job and therefore became eligible for the benefits that we're discussing today, why do you think you wouldn't? Why do you think your children? Why do you think your children wouldn't have deserved them?
So you believe that the entire country...
Can't answer a question with a question.
No,
Why do you think your children wouldn't have deserved that support?
If my children needed that support, then probably I'd claim for it. But you can't build a system...
But you wouldn't be able to claim for it if it didn't exist. So why do you think your children wouldn't deserve that support?
You're jumping in, James, like you always
It's what I do, Peter, when people say silly things. Because you've just said that if you found yourself in the situation that the people who received this benefit were in, then you yourself would claim it, but you are somehow still opposed to the benefit that you would claim.
I do not support, and I don't think most people...
Just listen back to my words. Listen back to my words, because I'm going to repeat what you said. okay? If you found yourself in the situation that people eligible for this benefit are in, then you yourself would claim it, but you don't think the benefit should exist?
No, I don't think the benefit should exist.
So who would feed the children in the circumstances of people losing their jobs?
The people. I would not build a system that proposes that the vast majority of people are going to have to become unemployed.
But we're talking about the people who have become unemployed. Who would look after the children?
I'm talking about people making choices and not having so many children they cannot afford to look after them.
Yes.
It's all about
And I'm
choice.
talking about people who can't afford to look after their children because they've lost their job. I'm talking about people for whom the welfare state is a safety net. And you're talking about people who use the welfare state as a trampoline. Do you know any?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about
them. We all know them. Well, you don't want to know.
I really do.
I mean, you really want to know? I don't think so.
No, I absolutely do. I want to know about the people you know who abuse the system.
You'd need a whole new program. Come back to me.
Well, just give me one then. Just tell me the story of one person you know who abuses the system.
One person, all right, I'll give you. I can't give you his name, but he is enjoying life on a luxury cruiser in Brighton Marina. No, don't laugh because this is true.
I'm allowed to laugh. It's a free country.
Yeah, well, you're not allowed.
How many children has he got?
He's got 5 children,
yes.
And he is enjoying life on a houseboat.
A luxury cruiser? Don't downgrade it. A luxury cruiser in Brighton Marina.
Cruiser.
Yes.
And I've taken this up with my MP, I've taken it up with the tax authorities, and they say he is entitled because that is his home, and he gets housing benefit and children benefit, and he swans around Brighton Marina.
But he doesn't.
You would be shocked.
He doesn't get the children benefit. Okay, so we're going after the people on Brighton Marina. I'm glad you had such a brilliant example, Peter. I feel very silly now. Don't laugh, Peter. We're outlawing laughter. Remember, a luxury cruiser. For goodness' sake, it's 11:32. You're listening to Luxury Cruiser Watch on LBC with me, James O'Brien. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, one swallow does not a summer make, but perhaps the cap on child benefit payments, or rather on the child-related element of universal credit, was built in to address concerns about people living on luxury cruises in Brighton Marina with 5 children. And you know, I mean, that's funny, but not always intentionally so. But that must be what the reasoning was, because everybody knows someone who is swinging the lead. Everyone knows someone who is living on the equivalent of a luxury cruiser in the middle of Brighton Marina while not working. In fact, I think we should all write to our MPs about it. Why would you punish the children in that situation? That's the thing, isn't it? And the distinction, if you like, between progressive and reactionary politics, in that I will presume that the parents are awful, and therefore if we give them money, we will almost certainly be subsidising their flat screen television habit and their drug addiction. I will presume that people are awful. I mean, some people call it the distinction between left and right. Other people are awful, but I'm not. Reactionary versus progressive. Most people are all right. Most people are good. Given half the chance, most of us would be better than we are now, probably. But that doesn't really butter any parsnips when it comes to politics. You've got to give people, why should my money go to these people? Answer, because they need it. Well, if I can somehow persuade myself that they don't need it, then I can justify not wanting them to get it. And the way to do that is to say, well, they're feckless, they're work shy, they're layabouts, they don't deserve the money. But then you're punishing the child, a child that already exists. Why would you punish a child for the fecklessness of the parent, even if that myth of fecklessness was anything like as relevant as some people like to pretend that it is? 5 children currently living on a luxury cruiser in Brighton Marina. Why would you want to punish them for the sins of the father? I don't know. Alan is in Bury in Greater Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just talking to your producer, and I think that the cap, the court. Yeah. It was that just general tide of austerity that was, Cameron and Osborne used the excuse of the financial crash to bring in austerity, and that's what it was for me. And you said something there before, James, reactionary versus progressive. Well, I can remember in 1998, we had 4 kids, and we didn't have a lot of money. What my wife worked term time, and what little money she got, had a bit more, went on childcare.
Yeah.
And then Gordon Brown comes along, working families tax credits, £90 a week. I thought I had won the lottery, James. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you. And then, honestly, it was like, have you heard about this? It's the guys at work saying, what? How you got that working families tax credit?
So it was a means-tested benefit for working parents?
Yeah, we know, because of our financial situation, because we had 4 kids, we got £90 a week, which was like, honestly, James, you cannot believe what that was like for us. And then I remember getting a phone call at home because the youngest was at nursery. And that nasty Gordon Brown, again, was paying half his nursery fees.
Gosh.
And then, and I will throw in, because, I've been on your programme before, I am a Labour man, as you know, and the best thing, probably the best thing that Gordon ever did, Gordon and Tony, Sure Start centres, reactionary versus progressive, and we forget all that. And, it's just...
I tell you something you've reminded me of, actually, because I'm trying to sort of think what the underpinning question here is. And you're right, 20 to 12 is a little bit late to be trying to think about what the underpinning question for an entire hour of radio is. But it's about a mindset. And Peter and Lewis introduced us to it. That it's a mindset that I don't need it, therefore no one should get it. But if I did need it, I would want it. And if you think to the debate about VAT on private school fees, it's absolutely extraordinary that people would be taking up cudgels over the introduction of VAT on private school fees, but not outraged by the idea of punishing children for the misfortune of having a parent who's suffering the misfortune of not having a job. And for all the people you can cite in luxury cruises in Brighton, or people who are choosing to be unemployed, or this largely exaggerated constituency of people who treat the welfare state as a trampoline instead of a safety net, none of that would justify the punishment of the people who are in need of it, the people who desperately need it. How did they get away with it, Alan? You were probably paying more attention than I was at the time.
Well, I mean, the thing is, at Bury, we've got about 3,000 kids, it's about 300, I think, 300 kids in care, about 350. And when, you go on training courses, that last one was called, it was called something like, don't forget where the ketchup is. And I won't explain why. But these kids, some of the stories are heartbreaking. And it's not their fault, James.
I know.
It's not their fault. And, I've had the argument, like, so you chose to have 4 kids, I don't, you chose it, you pay for it. I said, yeah, one of them's now, one of them's a doctor. So when you're old and knackered, he'll be looking after you. Because we chose to have 4 kids.
I suppose it's a theme, isn't it? It runs through a lot of our conversations on the programme about who you can persuade people to turn on. And it doesn't really matter who it is, as long as there's somebody in the firing line. It's probably more immigrants at the moment than it is unemployed people. But 37% of people on universal credit, Jack's just reminded me, are in work anyway. So you're acknowledging that we've created a society in which employers aren't paying people enough to live on or raise a family on. So the government steps in, and then another government comes into power, in this case David Cameron's, and steps on the parents who are struggling to raise a family, despite being in work in a large number of cases.
Well, I'll tell you this one, James. My daughter, my youngest daughter's had 2 heart operations.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, first one was 1994 when she was 3 months old. Older hay.
Yeah.
And she had a second one at 14, and you could not believe the transformation of that hospital under a Labour government.
No.
But anyway, the point I'm making is, first time the surgeon was Italian, his right-hand man was Saudi Arabian, the anaesthetist was Greek, second time the surgeon was Indian, and the anaesthetist was still there because she remembered looking at my daughter's nose. Nice. So, and this, and I could tell you so much. My daughter works in Europe, and she visited. Do you remember we used to call it? What's it used to call it in Calais? We used to get the jungle.
Yes.
she was talking to a guy there who spoke 5 languages.
Wanted to come here, start work, but of course they're in the firing line at the moment, and they're the most demonised section of is it society or the population? Alan, thank you. 11:43 is the time. This idea, it's almost there, isn't it? This idea that well, I'll read you what Joanne in Halifax has to say. You're very naive about punishing the children. A lot of people claiming child benefit today sit them in front of a screen from birth, pickle their brains, and when they go to nursery, they get diagnosed with ADHD, as so much screen time stops them speaking and concentrating, so they get more benefits. And if there wasn't a cap, they would just churn out more. Our society is in crisis. No, it's not their fault, but we can't encourage these people to have more kids. So you have to presume that, you know, you've got Joanne there in Halifax and Peter in Lewis with his mate in the luxury cruiser. You have to presume that there are some objections to this policy that don't make you sound like a sort of villain in a Charles Dickens novel, a 21st century Charles Dickens novel. There has to be. I mean, if David Cameron was here, or George Osborne, I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't say or go in for these tropes, these embellishments, these simplifications. There must have been a rationale behind it. And yet, sitting here today, it's impossible to see. And who do you want to look after you in your old age? Children that have been damaged by poverty, asks Keith, not that one, different one, or children that have had a relatively comfortable childhood. 11:44, it's just coming up to 11:45. Big news with regard to Ukraine at the moment, which has it hasn't fallen off the radar, but I think that the increasing difficulty of telling the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin apart has maybe seen as distracted from events in Ukraine. But there's a potentially immense development there, instigated in large part by the new German Chancellor, that we need to find out a little bit more about, and we will do that with Phillips O'Brien after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. Not my finest hour, really, opening up a conversation without knowing the proper detail of the story that was under discussion. And it's only really by the skin of my teeth that I acknowledged in the course of the introduction that I didn't really know what I was talking about. I don't often do that, and when I do it, I'm doing it vaguely tongue-in-cheek, like a sort of faux modesty. Oh, you know me. But on this occasion, I had actually got things completely wrong. So all the more reason to be grateful to Rosin Leeds for her clarifications. But at least we know what we're talking about now. What I don't know is what it's like, what this policy has done in the real world to real people. And we continue that quest as we wait to establish contact with Phillips O'Brien up at St Andrews University on a very, very important development in the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. Hayley is in Antrim. Hayley, what would you like to say?
I just wanted to say, in 2009, I qualified as a staff nurse, and my husband was a civil servant. Now, we earned relatively good money,
yes.
But the thing is, here, well, it was over there too, working families were able to get tax credits, a childcare element of tax credits for 70% of their total childcare.
Yes. Up
to the total of £40,000. So if you earned £40,000, you still got your 70% help of your
yes.
childcare. That was amazing, because that allowed me to go to work. Otherwise, I would have been paying £1,000 of my very small salary as a nurse to childcare. So it's not just about people on benefits. It's such a misconception. And we have such a fallen birth rate.
No, it's not just about people who aren't in work. It's all about people who are on benefits, but they're benefits that go to working people as well as non-working people.
But the thing is, the benefits that come to working people then go to childcare, who then, it's a good thing, because it's an economic, it's economic help all round. But just, and everybody complaining about the rise in immigration, who are going to look after older people, because we are going to have a gap.
It's a bit, it's an elephant in the room, isn't it? And they're almost competing now, with the exception of Ed Davey. They're almost competing on who can put out the more pungent narrative on reducing immigration. It's down by half, and none of them are happy. And yet, as we know, as you say, that we're heading towards a demographic reversal. More and more people are going to be not paying any income tax or not paying much tax and in need of help and support from the state, whether it's in terms of social care or simply an increasing reliance on the state pension. And yet here we are getting cross about the idea of having larger families. And there is a reverse ferret here. I think, for all the gaiety and jollity he brought to the programme, people like Peter and Lewis do feel like a disappearing breed. You don't have children if you can't afford them. Well, what would you have done if you couldn't afford yours after losing your job? Well, I'd have taken advantage of the system that's in place, the same system that I want to abolish. That kind of logical fallacy is in retreat, but only because it's going to be replaced by something else. Thank you, Hayley. A timely reminder that, of course, it's not just unemployed people that this affects, it's everybody. News, well, there's two elements, really, that I want to talk to Phillips O'Brien about. Phillips, you will remember, is the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews and our go-to guy, really, for matters Ukrainian and Russian. There's the military. There's always two sides to this kind of moment. There's the economic or the sanction-based responses and the military. In this case, the missile-based responses. Which one do you want to start with, Phillips?
I'm going to let you choose, James. I'm happy to do either. So.
Well, given that Merz is a relatively new arrival in the Chancellor's office in Germany, and Germany, I think it's an extraordinary turnaround politically and historically. Germany are very much perceived as leaders in this field. He has joined US, UK and France now in lifting range restrictions on weapons supplied to Kyiv. In other words, they can start firing missiles further than they were doing previously. What does that mean?
Well, that actually is potentially really important news. By the way, we don't really know if the U.S. is on board with that. Merz has said they're on board with that. Trump has never said they're on board with that. The U.S. is on board. In fact, Trump has said he's against range firing into Russia. So we have to be careful. Trump might have said something to Merz and Merz has run with it. Yeah. But if Germany is actually backing this, and it seems to be, and the other proviso, are they going to provide, say, the Taurus missiles to do this? So they have to provide the weapons to do it. Then it means, I think, an understanding that Europe has to help Ukraine get through this period. It has to arm Ukraine to fight, to survive, to do well. In my mind, it's also an understanding that they're losing faith in the USA, which is a positive thing at this point. Because under Schultz, by the way, they would have never done this because Schultz didn't want to break with Biden. It was all about Germany staying close to the United States. Whereas Merz, in a sense, breaking away from the U.S. on this policy is a sign, I think, that they no longer see the USA as reliable. So it's good for Ukraine, and I think it's good for Europe as well.
Partly, or largely, because of the tariffs hokey-cokey and just general dysfunction in the White House.
They've just been lied to so much by Trump, I wonder. I think they should have come to this realization 4 months ago, or actually a year ago, when they said he might come back. This is what he's always wanted to do. But the way he humiliated all of the European leadership two weekends ago, they were huddling, oh, Trump's with us, he's going to sanction Russia if there's not an unconditional ceasefire. And then Trump just throws them to the wolves and said, no, I'm not going to sanction Putin, so deal with it. That might have been the final straw, where finally they understood that Trump is simply not going to support Europe. And he's not going to support European leaders against Putin, and that they're going to have to do this themselves. Europe is going to have to rise to the challenge on Ukraine. So far it hasn't, but there are signs that it might be turning a corner.
And yet, I mean, almost to prove your point, Trump has wobbled again on the question of sanctions. I know you've been writing about this over the weekend.
He hasn't wobbled. He hasn't done a single thing on the sanctions. He's written a few tweets. That's what he does. He's written these, I might sanction Putin tweet. By the way, he's written that about 8 times. And and people like Vance have said it and Kellogg have said it. It's irrelevant until he does anything. Yeah. We have to stop falling for the tweets. The tweets are a narcissistic sociopath sort of saying things for political gain. Yeah. But if he wanted to sanction Putin, he could do it. If he wanted to sell arms to Ukraine, he could do it. He's choosing not to do it. So I wouldn't pay the slightest bit of attention to those tweets. Follow the actions. when it comes to Trump, not the tweets.
And the Kremlin won't be paying the slightest bit of attention to them either.
Well, they even dismissed it. They said Trump was being too emotional. This is, I think, how worried the Kremlin really is about Trump. That if they can. If Trump can write this thing, Putin's crazy, I'm going to sanction him, blah, 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 and the Kremlin response is, oh, he's just being a little emotional. That's, first of all, how confident the Kremlin is that they have Trump under their thumb.
Yes.
That he's not going to do it, and how unworried they are that sanctions are coming out of this administration.
That they are Putin is supremely confident that Trump will never do anything that he would be unhappy about.
He seems to be. I mean, he seems to not be worried about embarrassing Trump, showing Trump up, and having Trump do anything to harm Russia. So, I mean, it is everyone says Trump is transactional, but in this case, he's not transactional.
He is transactional, is he really? I think that's part of the myth, isn't it? The myth of the art of the deal. I suppose it leaves one quite big question hanging. I mean, this means now that Kyiv can fire missiles well into Russian territory. It can aim.
Well, they've already been firing their own missiles well into Russian territory.
They can fire German, French, and as you say, Merz said American, but as you've reminded us, take that with a pinch of salt, or at least a slice of wait-and-see pie.
Yeah, let's see if they start firing ATACMS, if they have any ATACMS left deep into Russia on certain targets.
Does that change anything? Is there anything else Putin can throw at this that he isn't already throwing?
Well, no. In fact, he's not even making the nuclear threats anymore.
No.
In some sense, he knows, that this war is it's a war. It's odd that we've fallen for this semi-war, limited war. No, This is a full war. Russia is bombarding Ukrainian cities every night. Okay, they're attacking across the country, destroying civilian targets. This is what happens in war when wars become unrestrained, and the Ukrainians are going to strike back. They have been striking back with their own systems. If they can strike back with German systems, the German systems will be more accurate, which is important, and they will have probably greater penetrating power than the Ukrainian system, so they could make a significant difference.
So I suppose to draw a bit of a distinction between the US and the European interests, Putin's supremely unconcerned by anything that Donald Trump might do because he's supremely confident that he knows what Donald Trump won't do. And this is a significant ramping up, but it's unlikely to be giving anyone in the Kremlin sleepless nights. What would a sleepless night look like? What might be the next stage as Germany, France and the UK and their European allies begin to look not only more united in policy terms, but also more committed in military terms? What might start actually spooking the Kremlin?
Well, there's a few things they could do. The key thing is what Putin would have to believe is that Europe is going to stick with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right now, he doesn't believe that. Or he thinks Europe will fold in the end and European leaders will lack the nerve and they'll force some kind of very bad deal on Ukraine when it comes. So to change that thinking, what he has to believe is that Europe has decided it wants Ukraine to come through this war in as good a position as possible. And that they are, one, willing to spend European money, build up European defensive capabilities, support what Ukraine is doing to such a degree that Ukraine is going to come out of the war in a good shape for Europe. And that could be anything from defense industrial investment to taking over some air defense in Western Ukraine, just even making security guarantees to Ukraine based on certain territories that would wake up the Kremlin. But right now, Putin does not seem to fear Europe.
And he knows that even when Trump makes these ludicrous pronouncements on social media, he also can't resist having a swing at Zelensky as well, which is, once again, the narrative of it's Ukraine's fault they got invaded, almost.
Well, I think we've been talking about this for a while, James.
We have.
The number one goal of Trump and Putin is to get rid of Zelensky.
Yes.
Yeah, Trump has been trying to get rid of Zelensky for since he became president again. That's been one of his number one goals. He hates Zelensky. This goes back to the Hunter Biden laptop and all of that nonsense. So Trump actually likes Putin or is scared of Putin and wants to appeal to Putin, but he loathes Zelensky and he wants to get rid of Zelensky. And that comes out more and more in all of these tweets.
Do we know why?
Well, with Zelensky, I think it has to do with the fact of the Hunter Biden laptop, and he
refused to be coerced into helping Trump.
Yeah, that, and also Putin doesn't like him. The fact that Putin doesn't like Zelensky seems to really matter to Trump as well. So it's a combination of Zelensky in Trump's mind didn't do the dirty on Biden, and that Putin wants to get rid of him.
Well, you got one fan at least. Roddy's been in touch to say, amazing in-depth analysis from Phillips, as always. Thank you. I will add my voice to that gratitude, Phillips, if I may.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Phillips O'Brien, Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews, and a very, very helpful guide as these issues become more complicated, but also more important. It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 12 is the time. I think a complete change of pace now. A complete change of pace, a change of content. This is something I've been thinking about for ages, since lockdown, actually. And I can tell you exactly why. I wanted, during lockdown, I presumed, when I began to finally get my head around what it was likely to mean, I thought I was going to read all of the books that I'd never read. You know, like all of the big novels that you'd never quite had the time or the space. Because what else were you going to do? Do you remember you weren't even allowed out of your house except for a little walk in a prescribed area? So I presumed, once I'd got my head around what lockdown was likely to represent, I was going to get myself to have a proper crack at Ulysses. I'm probably going to read to the end of War and Peace. What else was on my list of books I've never read? I kind of, there's a couple of authors. I always felt that I hadn't properly done the Russians. So I was going to work my way through the Russians and read all of that. And then I can't remember when I noticed I wasn't even reading the stuff that I read before lockdown. I wasn't even reading as much crime fiction as I expected to. So once the heady ambitions of Dostoevsky and James Joyce had been dashed, once I realised I wasn't going to be picking up the books that take up more book space, more bookshelf space than any others, I presumed I'd just really go to town on the books that I read all the time, like my favourite crime fiction writers, particularly historical crime fiction writers. I'm an absolute sucker for really good whodunits that are set in the Tudor era or set during the Restoration or set. I love all that because you sort of feel it's a bit more nourishing than a crime fiction, than a whodunit that's set in modernity, because you're learning. So I know a little bit about George Downing, for example, after whom Downing Street is named. And I know a little bit more about Charles II and the background to the slave trade, actually. And just a lot of stuff that gets smuggled in. I think the king of the genre for me, historically, was probably... I forget his name now, C.J. Sansom, who wrote the Shardlake novels that have been brilliantly, he's no longer with us actually, but he wrote the Shardlake novels that have been brilliantly captured on film on Sky. But there's loads more, which I absolutely love. And I learnt a lot from them, I still do. And I'm probably reading a little bit more now of these than I was on lockdown. Some of it has come back, but my mojo has gone. My attention span, I am sure, has diminished. This job is the saving of me, because I can't get distracted when I'm doing this job, except on the rare occasions when I am distracted. But that's usually by someone walking past or Keith behaving strangely in the production office. This job, I've got no idea whether I have low-level ADHD or something like that, but I do know that I find it almost impossible. When I write a book, oh my days, I can lie in bed on Sunday morning knowing that if I don't write 2,000 words today, I'm going to have to give the advance back. I can be fully conscious of that in my brain. I've got it, and I've spent the advance, sometimes twice. And yet, well, if you don't get out of bed, you won't have to do any work. And suddenly it's like 11, 12 o'clock, and I go, oh, just get out of bed and write. And then so I get out and I go into my... And I sit at my desk. I'm so bored. I haven't even done anything yet. I'm so distracted. I just check what's on Twitter. I'll just see what's on. So this is back when I was writing a book. I was still onto it. I'm just going to have a quick look at Blue Sky. I'm just going to, maybe if I read a bit, it'll get me in the mood for writing. I'll go and read a bit. I've just 2 pages. I'll just go and make a sandwich. I wasn't like this when I was never like Mr. Flipping Commitment. I was never Mr. Logic. I was always one of those people who had to be chained to their desk. But I could read a book. Man, could I read a book. I could read during the school holidays. I sometimes would read more than a book in a day. I'd read a whole book. I had nothing else to do. I lived in the countryside, just outside Kidderminster. I couldn't drive. What else was I going to do? I could literally read a whole book from beginning to end in a day. That was normal. I read this morning that TED Talks are becoming shorter because the organisers believe that the average attention span has shrunk. And I read it and thought, yep, and then I read further. There are 4 groups of people in Britain. This is research by King's College a couple of years ago now, so I suspect things have got worse, not better. You've got positive multi-screeners, accounting for 42% of those who were surveyed. So the biggest constituency, positive multi-screeners. These are people who see lots of benefits from the wealth of information available. I guess I fall into that category, but I could be a positive multi-screener and also recognise that my own attention span it's toast. Then you've got the stressed tech addicts who were highly engaged users but felt that it was causing the end of deeper thinking. Yeah, I think I am a positive multi-screener. I don't feel the end of deeper thinking. You've got overloaded skeptics who were even more negative than the highly engaged users who describe themselves as stressed tech addicts. And then you've got the disengaged and untroubled who barely noticed any signs of an attention war. They, I guess, have just kind of opted out. I had dinner with a friend last week and he told me that he's stopped following the news. I said, mate, that's a bit tricky for me, you know. I kind of can't stop following the news. But he was extolling the virtues of not following the news anymore. I felt this is a little bit like telling footballers that you wish football would be abolished. That, you know, it's an odd thing to say to someone whose livelihood is the news. But he's a very old friend of mine, so we let it pass. But it did occur to me that the happiest people now are possibly the people who've managed to disengage themselves from social media. And social media gives you the not just the distractions, but the tools with which your brain is reprogrammed. As a white 53-year-old British man, a demographic that is obviously in the news today, I have been a little bit embarrassed by what Reels have done to me. Do you do this? So what do the Reels, is that the same as being on Instagram? Is that? Yeah, but also Facebook, it's going to be the same stuff, isn't it? It's going to, because it's the same company, right? Yeah. So I don't really do Instagram. I probably should. But my Facebook feed has started delivering me Reels, which are little short films, and my algorithm's brilliant. So I go through phases now. At the moment, I'm getting loads of amazing table tennis. I know that doesn't sound terribly exciting, but if you haven't seen a snake in its full glory, you haven't seen a snake being undertaken by a world-class table tennis player, then you haven't lived. But of course, what they do, and I know you know all this, but just bear with. And what they do, of course, is calculate to the nth to the nanosecond what you watch. And then they just give you more of what you like. So I have relatively late in life found myself being able to concentrate for 90 minutes, maybe, at a time. So I just sort of say Mrs. O'Brien goes to bed and I might say, I'm just going to watch the news headlines. And then I click on something that I like the look of on my Facebook page. And the next thing you know, it's 11:15. I was like, where is all that time gone? So my attention span when I'm doing that is fine. I played Indiana Jones in the Grand Circle yesterday for 5 hours straight. My attention span on that was fine. I finished it, but I've been going back over to complete all the missions that I didn't complete the first time round. But my actual attention span, and I'm saying since lockdown, when it comes to reading books, has been completely destroyed. So I completely recognise that the TED Talks people think that our attention spans have been shredded. Here's a really good example. This is Sir Jonathan Bate, the academic and writer, who has taught in British and American universities for 4 decades. He told the BBC last year that when he began teaching, students would be able to read 3 Charles Dickens novels in a week. That's what I was talking about. I couldn't do a Dickens in a day because they're quite big books, but I could do a normal-sized book in a day, and I could do a Dickens in 2. I could easily have read 3 Charles Dickens novels in a week when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. Now, says Professor Bate, they're struggling to get through 1 novel in 3 weeks. So they've gone from 3 in a week to 1 in 3 weeks. He's talked about how the GCSE and A-level syllabus may have contributed to this because they do actually... Oh, they do. Why are all the kids reading Of Mice and Men? I mean, we read it when I was a lad, but we also read long books. Did Great Expectations for O-level. Did Of Mice and Men when I was like 13. Oh, I think both my daughters have done Of Mice and Men for their GCSEs. Why? Because it's short, I imagine. I'm not criticising anyone. I did the works of J.D. Salinger on Celebrity Mastermind because he only wrote 4 books. So I do appreciate the power of brevity, and it's a lot easier to become an expert at something if there's less material to choose from. But everyone seems to have done Of Mice and Men for GCSE, and it's a good book. But I suspect that one of the things that recommends it most is the fact that it's short. The Grapes of Wrath is a much better book. The Grapes of Wrath is an extraordinary book, or Wrath if you prefer. So, I mean, I don't think you'll be able to tell me what happened, why this has happened. But I'm going to ask you anyway. Has this happened to you as well? And can we fix it? Do you know what I'd love to do? I'd love to talk to someone who's come back out the other side. I'd love to talk to a veteran of the attention span wars. I am not reading books on anything like the scale that I have done for all of my life, not just my adult life, since the age of about 6. I'm not going to lie to you. I was quite precocious as a reader. I remember Mum being asked once by my teacher when I was in kindergarten whether I was lying about having finished a book. I'd read a book a night, just a little. I'm not boasting. I was rubbish at lots of things. I just used to read like it was going out of fashion. So I don't have a short attention span if I can spend 5 hours playing a video game or 90 minutes watching bloody Instagram reels, albeit that they contain some quality ping-pong content. So I want to know what you think is happening to us, because I know that an awful lot, I can tell from my inbox, loads and loads of other people are agreeing with me or recognising what I'm describing. I quite like that. Crikey, James, writes Graham, it didn't feel short when I did it in... I've lost the message now. Graham mentioned his English. Here it is. Crikey, James, it didn't feel short when I was 16 in Mr. Chambers' class. Apparently it's not a new thing to have done Of Mice and Men for GCSE. That shows how old I am. But what can we do about it? And do you know what else I'm going to ask you? Is it definitely a bad thing? 0345 60 60973. So has it happened to you? What has happened to us? And are we sure it's a bad thing? Look, society changes. Human beings evolve. One of the biggest lessons I've learned talking to you every day is that my experiences as a 19-year-old, my experiences as a student are not very relevant to conversations about scholarship today. What was true in 1992 is not true in 2025. It wasn't true in 2022. So, I presume it's in my dayitis, isn't it? We all suffer from my dayitis, even those of us who lob rotten tomatoes at the worst sufferers on a daily basis. Everybody thinks that things were better when they were young. Some things were better when they were young. You sort of go, oh, they're doing it differently now. Different must mean worse. Look at how much of our political discourse hinges upon the lie that different means worse. Why are you so opposed to that? Oh, it's different. We didn't used to have to do that. It must be worse. Different doesn't usually mean worse. Different usually means better. You know, a Bakelite telephone. What was I thinking about the other day? The days before smartphones. If you were going to be late for a date, if your train was delayed, and the object of your desires was waiting outside Waterstones in Birmingham for you, and you were going to be like 90 minutes late, and the chances of her being there when you got there, I actually read as she was, but only because she knew that there was no earthly way I'd have stood her up. Therefore, there must be a reason why I wasn't coming, and that I would arrive. Otherwise, I would have let her know. But that's better. Now, who would sacrifice that in order to... But anyway... What's happened to yours? What's happened to us? And what can we do about it? But the most interesting question of all, perhaps, is, are we sure this is actually bad for us? So it's Eli Shafak, the brilliant novelist, who has described being told, Elif Shafak, has described being told by the TED Talks people to reduce her talk from 19 minutes to 13 minutes. And when she asked why, they said, well, the world's average attention span has shrunk. She was speaking at the Hay Festival. And that, she says, made me really sad. We are incapable of listening to a talk for more than a few minutes. To be fair, if she was at the Hay Festival, then the event she was talking at would have been an hour long. But it speaks to a broader truth, apparently. Research at King's College, as I said, found 49% of the public thought their own attention span was shorter than it used to be. Are we sure this is a bad thing? Are we sure this is a bad thing? Well, it's different. Is it definitely worse? I have a feeling that it is. I miss books. I miss reading books. I can read. What have I got on the go at the moment? I've got Kate Atkinson on the go at the moment. And I'm sure when I started reading the Inspector Brodie books, I would inhale them. And now I'm just doing like a chapter a night. I didn't even bring it on the train with me because I'm too busy playing word games on the New York Times app. I don't know what's going on. But something's changing, and I don't know that it's necessarily for the worse. 0345 6060 A couple of comedians. Mr. Bain says, I just zoned out, James. What did you say? And Bruce says, this is very bad news for prog rock bands. Rob asks, are you seeking instant gratification? Which reads like something you used to see in a phone box, Rob. But I do understand your point. Maybe I am. But 5 hours on a video game's not instant gratification. Anyway, I don't know. Do you? And also, those other questions.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Honestly, come one, come all. The comedians are out in force today. Paul's been in touch. Have you considered shortening your monologues to account for these shorter attention spans? No, I'm fighting a battle against the reduction in attention spans. But also, why? I mean, this show's very popular, more popular than it's ever been. And my monologues are absolutely interminable. Endless. That last one brought us up to 21 minutes, breaking all the laws of radio. That's just me blathering on. And yet it's popular, more popular than anything else in the history of talk radio on commercial stations in this country. What? So, I mean, and look at that, the podcast market. Some of those podcasts, particularly in the manosphere, they're like 3 hours long. They're just sort of rambling. Do people stay engaged for 3 hours, or are they beneficiaries of shortening attention spans because you zone in and zone out? God forbid anyone does that during my scintillating monologues. But there's a lot going on here, and I'm not 100% sure that it's bad, except the reading stuff. I completely agree, James, says Steve. I've bought books I want to read and then not touched them, including your last one. Crikey, lads. Stuff just got serious. The last book I read, he says, was Luke Harding's Shadow State. And that was years ago. What's going on? Di's in Sudbury. Di, what would you like to say?
Well, exactly, James. I am rereading books that I read some time ago, but I still can't get past the 5th chapter.
Gosh.
I mean, I know the book, and it's also, I get the Saturday newspaper,
yes.
But I cannot finish the whole article because I get bored.
Gosh, and you didn't previously?
No, I used to read the whole thing. But
is bored the right word? Is bored the right word? Distracted and bored aren't quite the same thing.
I think distracted. I think I'm saying, I've heard the main thing. I don't need to listen to the rest.
Yes, that makes sense.
Also, I go to bed with the podcast on and I fall asleep.
No, that's what it's there for.
Exactly. So I never listen to the end, and I am an information person. I love news, but I cannot read the whole thing. Is it I'm overthinking? Am I overthinking?
I don't know, but I'm trying to work out why some things you can stare at for 90 minutes. And it's obviously what we're describing is buttons being pushed in our brains, chemicals or impulses that are being triggered and not triggered, and some are becoming more dormant while others increase. What else do you do differently? What do you spend time doing that you didn't do before?
I think there's a lot of visual, and I think I do look at my social media thing, and I would love to get rid of the phone, but you don't, because every 10 minutes you've got to look at what the news is.
Yeah.
I didn't have the news on because I don't listen to the news anymore because I don't like it. So suddenly I saw, oh my God, Liverpool, it happened. and then I have to go onto social media to find out. And then I'm only finding out about it on your show because I cannot put the news on because I don't like what I'm hearing.
So there's a gap somewhere for short... I mean, TLDR is a very good website, but people who package things up in much more bite-size... What do we lose as a consequence of this, Di? It feels like we're going to lose something quite important.
Well, we're not hearing both sides of anything. We're only hearing one side. Obviously, you're saying that, and I'm saying that. But, you know, it's that we have no reality now. We really don't know where we are. We really don't know. I mean, I follow the news. My daughter doesn't. She doesn't follow any news anymore because she doesn't like it.
No, I can't really blame her. Although, reminder that my kids need shoes, will you? Can't have everyone abandoning.
The younger generation must listen to news on both. Well, they can't because they're on social media and they're watching, TikTok or whatever.
Which are bite-sized, again, very punchy little films. I don't know. What are we losing? Critical thinking? I mean, thinking's hard. Are we thinking less? It sounds like we're thinking less. And we recognise that we're guilty of this as well. An awful lot of people feeling seen for the first time. It's obviously not a conversation that you start in company. Thank you, Di. This is from Geeta. Finally, someone is talking about this. I thought there was something wrong with me. Since lockdown, I can't concentrate to read anymore. I'm stuck with reels of cooking, cats, flowers, animals. I cook all kinds now instead of reading, and I get my interesting news faster. Alan points out, and Alan is a regular correspondent of mine who is very, very immersed in the COVID consequences, the medical consequences of COVID. He says, I've been banging on about this for a while, but repeated COVID illnesses really do impact the brain and the attention span. And he cites an excellent thread by a Blue Sky user called Cat in the Hat that shows or collates a whole load of studies looking at the detrimental impact on the brain of repeated COVID illnesses. That's going to be part of it, but it feels more behavioural than medical to me. It feels as if my habits changed during lockdown and they haven't changed back. And none of this explains why I could play Indiana Jones for 5 hours straight yesterday. And yet the idea of reading a book for 5 hours straight is alien to me now in a way when it used to be commonplace. Seb is in Hackney. Seb, what would you like to say?
Yes. Hi, James. Well, I actually finished a book and published a book recently. And that whole process was obviously, like you were saying, very concentrated. I had a lot of research to do. I also did a master's just before that. And this is sort of during the pandemic.
Yes.
And then the publisher said, you need to get onto Instagram. You need to get onto... And I wasn't on Instagram. So then I went on it. And of course, lo and behold, I got sucked into...
So you went on to promote your novel and you got mugged.
Yes, but my brain was mugged.
Yes.
And then it was, related topics to the book, but then it ended up being, oh, look, there's a nice white dog,
Yeah.
I tried to train the algorithm to not give me things that I'm interested in on the side and try to focus it on the sort of on the idea of the book. But what I was going to say, there is a sort of journey to this, is that it's all out now, and I don't have to go... Well, I mean, I should continue going on social media, but I've just kind of given up. So now I'm back on the reading, and I'm sort of half forcing myself to discipline myself to do more reading, and you can come back to it.
And you're doing the same hours that you were doing previously?
No.
No, you see?
No,
why?
No.
That's so bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're a professional writer as well. It should be absolutely second nature to you.
Yeah, I mean... That's a weird one, and I think, like you were saying, when you have a goal, when you're having to do research, and you get much more disciplined about it, for me it's easier. And I'm talking about fiction, reading for pleasure, right?
Yes, of course.
And I've kind of found that difficult to do, and I'm only kind of reading non-fiction now. And it's sort of quite serious things.
Yeah, no, well, it engages you differently, doesn't it? It's not escapism for a start. You're not.
Yes.
Gosh, do you want to tell us about the last book, Seb?
You don't. Yeah, I'm not going to do that because your producer said, "Please, this isn't to promote your book."
Did they?
So please,
that's a bit rude. Who spoke to Seb? I know. I want to know now. I think I've read. Goodness knows, Seb.
I don't want to get her into trouble.
I plug my own book, Merciless. That's probably what's upset her. Actually, is the merciless plugging of my own. No, I want to know about your last novel now.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Oh, it's called The Book of Thunder and Lightning, and it's basically a Victorian Gothic ghost story, and then also takes place in London.
That sounds right up my street.
Century.
That sounds that sounds right up my street. I can't believe what she was just trying to make sure that you had something interesting to say, and because it has happened on this program on occasion where someone has somehow managed to come on air when they've got nothing interesting to say except go to my website or read my book. But that was so gracious. Then your initial refusal to accept a free plug, that was absolutely charming. So I'm happy to
double bluff.
The book. It could have been. You could have played me like an old guitar. The Book of Thunder and Lightning. By Sebastian what?
Seb Duncan.
By Seb Duncan. Thank you, Seb.
Thank you so much.
No, absolutely, my pleasure.
Great show.
Might not make any difference.
For a long time.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? If I could shorten my monologues, maybe people would listen for longer. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:35. Quite a few of you want to know what word games I play on the train into work in the morning, so I shall tell you. It's the New York Times Games app. There's a small subscription involved. So I do the crossword every day. I do spelling bee every day. And I'm currently on a 124 streak on Wordle, which is my record. I was stuck on 99 for years because I'd just forget to do it once. And then I'd go, oh no, I've forgotten to do it. My friend Adrian, who used to work here, he posted recently about hitting 300. His greatest achievement of recent years was to get a 365 streak last year on Wordle. But someone pointed out it was a leap year. Well, I thought it was funny. So I do Wordle, I do spelling bee, I do the crossword every day, and then if there's time, and I do the mini crossword as well, and if there's time, I do connections, and I did strands for a while, but I find strands really hard. Just to get going. You can cheat, or if you get it wrong 3 times, it'll give you the first R. Anyway, that is to answer your question. And 3 of you asked how I got on Wordle today, and the answer is that I got it in 2, which is not a boast because it's largely luck, but the early ones are when you get it in 1 or 2. Skill kicks in when it's tricky. But I got it in 2 today for the only for about the 30th time or something. Let me just check because I know that you're fascinated by all this stuff. 53 times I've got it in 2. 246 times I've got it in 3. And by far the most common outcome is 379 times I've got it in 4. 55 times I've got it in 6. So now you know. 12:36 is the time. Michael is in Leigh-on-Sea. I wonder if you can remember why you rang in or if you've been distracted by something else while you've been on hold, Michael.
I've immediately been distracted by the Wordle talk.
There it is.
I'm very much a player of those games in the morning.
Good stuff.
But no, I was talking with your producer previously, and I think you briefly mentioned it. You might have skipped over it when you said with regards to engagement rather than attention span.
Yes.
When I was in secondary school, when I was younger, I would read goodness knows everything like you would not believe. We went through Hold when I broke my leg in year 8, and I read the entire book 4 times, whilst when the class was reading it, they were still on like halfway through. But since then, I've got a smartphone now, I've got a computer. I'm very often playing computer games. I'm doom scrolling on Facebook. And I think it is to do with engagement. Obviously, the human brain likes as much of itself to be engaged as possible. And when you're on social media apps, when you're playing video games, when you're watching television, you've got that sight, sound, flashy colours, noises. You're interacting. If it's a video game, you're actively playing it. When you're just reading a book, the brain has to do more work because it's your imagination that's creating all of those situations instead. And I think the last time that I was properly reading, I was up in my room and I kept pausing and looking around because it felt too quiet because there was that lack of engagement.
Yeah, but I think you're coming at it from the point of view of that not necessarily being a bad thing. Are you or not?
I'm not entirely sure.
No, I'm not either. I think it feels like it should be a bad thing, but then we may just be subscribing to the it's different and new, therefore it's worse school of thought.
I don't know if that's my logic of thought behind it. I think it could be a bad thing because it could lead to society always wanting to have all of the stimulation, sight, sound, and interactivity at all times.
It can't be a good thing. I mean, it's like we're becoming addicted to bells and whistles, is what you're describing, albeit that you've dressed it up in fancier language than that.
Yeah, I think so. But it's that it's. I think it's one of the more easily recognisable things. I realised on the commute into London in the morning, I realised I was just doom scrolling on Facebook, and so I made the effort. Let's download the Kindle app. Let's start reading again. And it is like even now, if I'm trying to read a book at the moment that I'm not hugely invested in.
It's not got you in the way that it would have done once. What are we losing? What do you think we're losing, Michael?
Well, I think it is partially the kind of book as well. The last book that I was fully invested in, I think it was
How They Broke Britain by James O'Brien.
No, it was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
It's a proper 1,300-page monster. Quite a lot of his books are very long.
And that got you. I mean, people are reading longer books, oddly, but I just guess it's taking them longer to do it. So the Twilight Saga, they were pretty hefty, and the what's the one that Jennifer Lawrence was in? They were pretty hefty books. The Hunger Games, the Harry Potter books were very long. Ian Rankin says novels are getting longer because if it's fewer than 300 pages, it's not taken seriously. But that doesn't mean that we're cutting down. Are we losing nuance? Thank you, Michael. I got loads of people wanting to talk about this, so I'm going to crack on. But I'll think about some of the stuff you just said. Catherine says we're losing. What are we losing? Nuance in everything we do and see and hear. Everything which distracts us is in black and white and infantilizing, and life isn't. See, it's relevant to the first hour. People who are getting high on very carefully curated. Online algorithms feeding you endless terror and horror and race-based vileness and bitterness. You get addicted to it. The idea of reading a study, actually reading detail, doing a fact check. Fact checks take time and effort and energy. Even reading them takes a lot more energy than just swallowing and regurgitating the original lie. I don't know. Amanda says we are losing the capacity for complexity, and that's dangerous. And Carl writes, absolutely boring radio, and that's also dangerous. Sam's in Forest Hill. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. Yeah, it's really interesting what you're talking about. I was completely...
Carl would disagree, mate. He says absolutely boring radio, but there you go. It takes all sorts.
Yeah, he's wrong. He's so wrong.
Carl.
Come on, Carl, get a grip. It is addictive. These apps are designed by neuroscientists to hone in on the reward part of the brain. That it's the same part of the brain that gambling. That creates gambling addiction. Yeah. And I don't think it's good long term for creative people. For a start, it's dissipating the arts and the creatives, and it's just making it. Everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame, and it's kind of. I don't think it's good for society, and I'm weaning myself off it right now.
Are you?
And
how are you going on?
Yeah, I'm getting there. I still with I don't know if I'm allowed to mention that.
Yeah, of course you are. It's not a great phone line. It's not a great phone line. It's got a weird click in it, so I won't detain you unduly. But has it affected your reading? Are you reading a lot less than you? Right, that's a killer.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, it's awful. Yeah, the last novel I read in its entirety, only because a friend of mine wrote it.
Yeah.
It was 2 years ago, and that's why I was able to sort of focus on it. Otherwise, you kind of think it's like your last call. He was saying, "Well, you drift off." It's like, "Well, why?" You want other stimuli.
Yeah, you're used to having a button pressed every 19 seconds as opposed to every 19 minutes, or and what's the end game? The end game is never being on social media and being back into books, or
but back into books and reading and going to the cinema more rather than sitting watching stuff at home.
Yeah, because you get distracted at home. You check your phone or you check your computer, and you have a completely different experience at the cinema. I bought a massive telly last year and got it set up in a way now that we can actually insist no one's allowed to have their phone in that room. And you can watch it almost like a cinema experience, and it's completely different. I showed my youngest If the other night, which is my favourite film of all time, and it was so powerful to watch it properly with neither of us checking our phones or pausing. But you're right, films are a really good example, actually, of how we've allowed our distraction. That's why you talk about multi-screen positivity, the idea that you can do 2 or 3 things at the same time, which is true, but you're not doing any of them as well as you would have done if you were only doing one thing. Sam, thank you. Douglas Adams, a genius, and one of those writers with whom, if you don't find him a genius, we probably wouldn't get on. He's on that level of genius. But he, as with almost everything in this kind of world, he nailed it. Someone sent me a little reminder of his diktats on this issue, and they are absolutely genius. Thank you to Bill for sending me this, also known as Pinball Phil. I've come up with a set of rules that describe our reactions to technologies. This is what I was saying about in my dayitis. Anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just a natural part of the way the world works. Right? There's 3 rules. That's rule 1. Rule 2, anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. So if it arrives between your ages of 15 and 35, fantastic. Anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. This is genius, isn't it? So if it's there when you're born, that's natural. That's how the world works. That's absolutely how things are meant to be. If it arrives in the world when you're aged between 15 and 35, it's new and exciting and revolutionary. And if you get your skates on, you can probably get a career in it. But if it arrives in the world after you're 35, it's against the natural order of things. And almost certainly the subject of a moral panic arriving at platform 2 any minute now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. There's something going on, isn't there? Whether it's good or bad or neither, it remains under question. But it's very hard to believe that a shrinking attention span is not a bad thing. Except for when you throw things into the mix like the fact that you can now do 3 things at once. I don't know if you've watched, I don't know how old you are for a start, but I don't know if you've watched young people multi-screening. The idea they can watch something on their laptop while also checking their socials and doing, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? It may not be either. It may just be how things are now. But the weirdness of the diminishing attention span, particularly when it comes to books, is surprisingly commonplace this morning. I thought it was just me. 10:01 is the time. James is in Scarborough. James, what made you pick up the phone?
Good afternoon, James. Yeah, there definitely has been a reduction in attention, and it's come from an absolute kind of melting pot culturally of where we are with technology. So we've got dopamine. So an animal will have some food, and there might be a toy next to it, but the animal will go to the food first. Humans have this dopamine, which is why we're creative, why we search pleasure, and we could ignore the food to go and learn something or discover something or something that we derive pleasure from. The technology is tapping into that because obviously social media generates more revenue by the more time you're on it. Yes. So the more that it taps into the dopamine, then the more it's kind of generating that. So it's learned to really tap into those elements, like another caller said, gambling addiction's the same, and it's why we love video games, because that's tapping into...
There's more happening. So because I wouldn't know, without the science, you wouldn't know why one necessarily destroys the other, because I might be enjoying my social media dopamine hits, but why would I enjoy reading a book less? And the answer is because you're getting fewer dopamine hits.
you're having to work. The brain's having to work a lot harder to get the dopamine. So you still get, if you like reading, you still get dopamine from that book. But then if your phone's next to you, it's, screaming out of an instant injection of dopamine. So you will kind of reach for that rather than the book.
You will, and even when you're into your book.
Definitely.
I think I just got the time wrong. I just got the time wrong. That's probably because you distracted me, James. It was 12:49 2 minutes ago, not 10:49. I hope nobody's had a panic attack as a consequence of that. Can you reverse it, do you think? Is there anything we can do? I mean, is it necessarily a bad thing, is the first question I want you to answer.
There is some aspects of it being bad, particularly the next generation, like less people will be watching movies. They're more into this instant 30-second videos. It does tap into what you were saying earlier about the kind of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories feed into that dopamine, and the algorithms have noticed that because of that, they will give you search is the Earth round. It'll start giving you flat Earth conspiracies, because it feeds into that buzz if you've got this special information. So that does give you more dopamine.
But but my table tennis clips obviously give me quite a lot of dopamine at the moment, and they're being so you can go down rabbit holes that are not unhealthy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's tapping into that individual thing, but that's offered because it does give people a hit. So it is offered first, which is why we're seeing a rise in that type of ideology.
Of course it is, yeah. Of course it is. I don't want to sound patronising, but you sound, unlike me, you sound like you know what you're talking about on this subject, James. Is that you haven't just arrived on this radio show and come up with these theories?
Yeah, I do research and lecture in ADHD, and I've got ADHD myself, so obviously this is a major factor, even more for us than other people without the condition.
Because of the relationship between dopamine and the brain.
Yeah, it's the main factor in what ADHD is constantly lacking and searching. So everything that kind of drives that, we're seeing kind of the behaviours that we've struggled with happen to neurotypical people in the population a lot more as well.
Oh, wow. I don't know if you heard my introduction where I posited the possibility that I might be on that spectrum somewhere, but in fact I might actually be one of the neurotypical people who's now experiencing what you always live with.
Well, you're really good at what you do, and that's because you've got ADHD, I'm pretty certain.
Do you think so? Seriously?
I think so. I've been listening to you for years and reading your books, and I think if you looked at the diagnostic criteria, there'd be enough to warrant getting one.
You are not the first person to suggest that, James, as it goes, and that's why this job suits me so well, because you can't get distracted. Apart from having Eleanor and Keith staring at me like goldfish through the glass every morning, I can't. Imagine what would happen if I got distracted. Someone could do a libel. We could have some swears, all sorts of mad things. I could lose my own thread, God forbid. I could get the time wrong. Imagine if that would ever happen on this programme. But it is, I've always suggested, thank you, James, the job is a bit like flying an aeroplane or something like that. I can concentrate for large periods of time on an incredible level because I absolutely have to. But if I didn't have to, I wouldn't. It's weird. Thank you, mate. Ali's in Winchester. Ali, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Yeah, it was just to sort of chip in, really. And
that's the spirit.
I noticed I was really distracted. I noticed, so I've got a young son, and I noticed that.
When did you notice that, Ali? Did it come as a major surprise to you?
No, he pretty much makes his presence still known
Carry
all the time. I noticed that I was getting very distracted by my smartphone when I was with him. And although I would have it round the corner so that he would never see me on it, even then when I left it round the corner, I'd go back to him and I'd be distracted because you sort of look and you've got about 30 plus notifications sometimes.
Yeah.
So my subconscious was always kind of thinking about those.
You're always elsewhere.
And I just didn't want that anymore. So I ended up buying a dumb phone, which is what I use when I'm with him.
Okay.
So I'm on my dumb phone normally sort of Friday to Monday, and then I use my smartphone during my working week. And what I noticed was I was so much happier when I was on the dumb phone, but my concentration was so much better, and I was so much more present. And I was reading more. I was taking in news and having critical thoughts more. My conversation skills were better. My brain was more engaged. Everything was better. And I think it's because your subconscious thinks about your smartphone content even when you're not actively using it.
And if your subconscious knows that it's not there, then your subconscious stops harassing you. Any downsides?
So probably the only thing is you have to be a bit more organised in terms of if you need Ringo or Google Maps or anything like that.
Yeah.
you have to be a bit more organised. So I take my smartphone switched off with me, and it hasn't got my SIM card in.
Sure. Wow, you've really gone to town then, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've gone quite hardcore.
Oh, but it's just, honestly, now I've done it, I wouldn't go back. And I'm leaning more and more towards using my smartphone like the old school iPods where they looked a bit like an iPhone, but you could only use them when you're connected to Wi-Fi.
Yes, of course.
I'm using it more and more like that now.
Okay.
So that I'm not, I'm much more...
And this is the new you. There's no reason why you'd go back to the old ways, really.
Oh my goodness, once I think you've taken a step back, it's so telling. And what's quite interesting, I think, when you're looking particularly, say, at parents with children, is it's quite sad when you can see children trying to get their parents' attention and they're glued to a phone.
I caught myself reading I've told you this before, but you may not have been listening. I caught myself checking my phone over my daughter's head when I was reading her a bedtime story once. Oh, the shame I felt, Ali. The shame. And that was the point. It's so hard
because it's so addictive.
That was precisely the point at which I left it downstairs at bedtime from that moment onwards, and I missed absolutely nothing. I love that. That's so cool. And dumb, of course. I've not heard that before, but it's the opposite of smart.
It's a very basic brick phone, but honestly, I find, because even with the communication, when you're texting someone, you have to press the button so many times to get the letter.
Yes.
So your communications are much shorter
so it
and to
makes
the
you
point.
a lot more thoughtful then. Has your boy noticed?
Do you know what? It's quite funny because he just does. He used to be fascinated if my smartphone was near.
Of course.
And then with the brick phone, he sort of says bye in it and then just chucks it on the floor and isn't engaged with it at all anymore.
So he's not sort of fantasizing about what it will be like when he has one day, because he must be responding to how fascinated you appear to be by it.
Yeah.
And he's not getting that either, so you're not giving him a learned behaviour. Well, I don't know that I could because of my job, but I should probably. It's worth a try, maybe. A dumb phone. 12:50. Thank you, Ali. What a lovely hour that was.
James O'Brien on LBC.